Thank you all for coming out. I was afraid no one was going to show, so I'm glad some people came.
They're here. Our people show.
It's the eternal fear. You walk in, it's
Yeah.
like throwing a dinner party and one person comes. It's the worst
Well,
fear.
we're open every day, so we go through that daily, but thankfully we have a very dedicated audience.
Yeah, thank you all.
We don't want to give away anything, obviously, of the film that we're about to see, but I'm just wondering if you can just set up the story for us a little bit and how you came to this story. You're a prolific filmmaker, but you seem to be taking your time in choosing your projects. So I just wanted to maybe have you share a little bit about this project.
Yeah, it came about in a very interesting way. I had made 3 films. You're right, I'd been waiting a long time for my opportunity to make some movies. So I kind of made 3 of them in 4 years. It was like, hold my place in line. And then I was actually attached to make another one, Right Again, which would have been 4 in 5 years, and that was the film, it ended up coming out, Deepwater Horizon, about the oil rig, and I worked on that for about a year while I was finishing A Most Violent Year, and it was like I was in like a race, and the race got a little too intense. I had young kids at the time, and then I got into, it was sort of the beginning of realizing that when I didn't have total control, and that was a very, very intimate, kind of intense story where people died and real people died, and they were trying to get me to sort of start, you start getting that situation where they start to get you to try and change things, and so for all the right reasons, we sort of split up on that project, and I'm glad it went on and got made. I put a lot of work into it, so I'm glad the movie happened, but I actually haven't ever seen it, but I'm glad it happened. But the interesting thing was, coming out of that, I really enjoyed the process of not having to be the sole person who came up with the story, and so it was a real life event. I was taking an article that David Barstow, a famous New York Times amazing reporter, had written, and so it put a lot more pressure on my directing. And the writer side of me could just kind of more act as an executor. And I'd found with the 3 other films, while it was amazing to think up the idea and then try and write it and then raise money and then every step of the way kind of be in charge, it was good for my ego, but I think my directing muscles, you get a little, when you think up an idea and then write it, and with my brain, I know exactly what I want it to be, and so the directing started to feel a little bit like I was just trying to get that same thing that had been in my head for 3 years out, as opposed to, and I want to go back to that opportunity, but it's before I became too sort of calcified in it, I wanted to try somebody else's idea that I wasn't quite so married to every element of. So after I left that other project, I started looking around at different books and stories and articles, and I read this, and it's set in the military world. It's about 5 retired kind of midlife, early midlife, crisis situation where you sort of come out of this job that these guys had, and you'd felt so necessary and so alive, I think, and then those skill sets don't really always transfer into the real world. Sometimes they do, but with this particular group who were real special forces guys, your skill set doesn't really transfer into the real world. And then it mashed that story up with a heist movie, which are my old favorite movies in the world. I come from a military family. I didn't serve in the military, but my grandfather did his entire life, and my dad is a combat veteran, a decorated combat veteran in Vietnam, and then came back and had a very difficult time coming back. And or he didn't have a difficult time, but was society was having a difficult time with the soldiers, and so it wouldn't have been something that I ever would have mashed up myself as a writer, because it just with the military angle, it's a little kind of on the knife's edge, and I don't think I would have ever thought to bring those 2 things together. But when I read the script, it was an early version written by Mark Boal. And when I read that, I realized that that was something as a director that I thought I could kind of do it's a very double-sided story. Yeah. So I jumped on it, and then 3 years later, it finally got made. There was a journey between then and there.
Well, it seems like you have in this film, it is interesting that it's a heist film after all. Like when you'd see it, it's thrilling. And it is about, in the way that Margin Call is around this very specific culture. Yeah. You're capturing this sort of other culture. And I feel very much humanizing from my perspective, these characters. I'm just going to ask you, I mean, it was very interesting. I won't give anything away by saying this thing, but because it's interesting because you really deal with
You've seen the trailer, you've seen, no,
yeah, but I thought it was a very deep and very interesting premise where you set the film up at this idea of what does violence do to a person?
Right.
Like what is that? Perpetrating violence on others does something to you as a person. Yeah. And that's sort of a real jumping off point in many ways of a lot of the moments, the characters, the subplots of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's sort of the subtext. The movie kind of hopefully operates on a very, I apologize, it's a bit of a wild ride, so hang on. But it operates as a good old-fashioned action heist movie, which I love, those movies. But there is a great sort of subtextual element. And I think not without kind of trying to go too deep on it, it's almost like we all bear a small scar of the last 20 years. We've been at war actively as a taxpayer, been financing a war for 20 years or 18 years. And these are the kind of literal tip of that sword. So I feel I'm way down at the handle. I'm paying my taxes and feeling, that we've had that violence on our hands. And with those resources, what else could we have done with the resources that we've spent? And so the film, for me, was a way of kind of going back with the real characters that were there at the tip of the sword, and without having to have the movie set in the Middle East or, all the things that kind of come with that, but just the characters, the people that have been fighting that war on our behalf, whether we want them to or not. They have been, and this sort of allowed you to go on a journey, hopefully by the third act, where you're sort of with them and you're realizing that there is a price to pay for what we've done for everybody.
This is a second film with Oscar Isaacs, and I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process with actors. Margin Call is such a richly acted film with such an incredible cast. Then you went to do a film with one actor, Robert Redford. And I think you've gone back and forth, but you always have these really exquisite actors.
Yeah, I've been insanely lucky. This is sort of a bookend movie to Margin Call for me. It's about primarily a male testosterone-driven culture, the banking industry and the war industry. And, so it's predominantly driven by a group of men, a great ensemble. So casting that is a jigsaw puzzle on many levels, on personality, skill sets, type of actors, hair color, crazy things that you'd never think. And then the good old-fashioned scheduling, which a movie like this takes a long time to shoot. So you got to block huge amounts of time. And so one of the great things about the movie having to push a couple times, which it did for several reasons, was I always thought Oscar would be amazing in the lead role. The part you'll see in a couple of minutes, the film sort of starts in South America, and he's a consultant, an American, very American. So it was a perfect, Oscar. It's a little autobiographical for him, but Oscar grew up in Miami, but his mom is Guatemalan and his dad's of Cuban descent, but he grew up in Miami, so he's as American as they come, but he has this great connection through his mom especially, with Central America. And so we played into that, and you'll see that the first 20 minutes of the movie makes a lot more sense now with him in that role, and it just sort of felt right. And then on another front, it's just I had never worked with an actor again. Every movie I had done for no no specific reason, but just through coincidences, no one. I'm not a jerk or something where no one will come back. But at least I hope I'm not. But but I hadn't, and it was an amazing experience to like have your friend there with you, because I had become friends with him, and I think we both grew up so much on A Most Violent Year. So, and he's like, it's like having a Formula One race car as an actor, because he's classically trained, but a punk rock band play. He's got this two sides of his personality, which you can use as a director to amazing. It makes your job a lot easier, I guess is the easiest way to say it, because he's able to use traditional, formal education, and then have this very raw, just pure talent on top of it. So working with him makes it a whole lot better. You sleep better.
He's very charming. He was here not that long ago, and
He's charming.
His last name is Hernandez, and he came up to Eugene Hernandez, who I think you all know, and told him that he had named his son after him.
It's
and
true.
He did. He does have a son named Eugene Hernandez.
Yeah, it's Eugene and his mom. His mom's name is Eugene, not Eugenia, I think. And so, but they are. He's the cutest little guy, and that was the other fun thing that was amazing about this is. We also, just to get to hang out with your friends, this was a brutal movie, and we needed like a 6-month break, the two of us at the end. We're talking again, so it's good. But it was a long journey, and the movie does operate, you'll see, on these two very different levels. So Oscar was having to do these very intense action sequences, which take quite, especially the way he wanted to do them, had great precision and execution, and he wanted everything to be right for his character. And then other moments where it was just good old-fashioned character acting, where you had to slow everybody down, and so for the crew and even the lighting people, just all to sort of go from in the afternoon doing one thing, and then or in the morning, and then in the afternoon having to sort of slow it all down. It was, I think, intense for all of them, but I think it hopefully that energy shows.
Can you just tell us when will this be premiering, and where else can people see it, and what's going to be happening with the film?
Yeah, the film is one of these new Netflix releases, which has been, I've gotten a lot of questions about it this week, and I think the industry, we're all in a we were where the music business was, 10 years ago. We're in the middle of a technological transformation where people have, for $300 or $400, you can have a movie screen in your living room, and yet there's this desire, clearly, to still want to come out together and experience these movies together. So I think this windowing issue, I'm not going to weigh into the business side of it, but obviously there's compromises and things that are going to be had here one way or another. But Netflix is doing an amazing job. The movie gets released on it was released last Wednesday, and then it's released this week. So in theaters, it was released not a ton, but and then it goes to 130 million users on one day, and this will without a question be. In the best case, this is going to be 200 or 300 million people that get to see the movie, which is a little daunting. My friend said it better be good because everyone will see it this time, which is true. It's going to be sitting there on the service. So I think it's going to be certainly the largest undertaking you'll see that I've ever been involved with, and that was part of the fun of it, was to try and create a big, broad, worldwide, fun, movie. But in the middle, I think we've got these $200 million movies, and then we have a ton of the All Is Lost and that budget, which is amazing. But when I sort of look back on the movies that I loved as a kid and a young adult, it was really the ones in the middle that really affected me, and they kind of affected me on that visceral, cinematic, popcorn way, but then they were also able to sort of operate and be a reflection of what's going on in our real world, you know, and not fantasy. And it feels like movies are sort of giving that middle ground away to the 10-hour television, you know, world, where I think sometimes 2 hours is a just about right. You know, I don't want to make a commitment sometimes to sit there for 10 hours. I want to sit down and experience a part of the world that I haven't experienced, and then and then get to go on with my life and do the other things I got to do. So, you know, I hope that 2-hour movie in the middle like this, Netflix is doing a great job supporting those.
Well, you had mentioned in your previous film you had some problems with some of the studio notes and things like that. So this seems to be a real draw for filmmakers to have a little bit more freedom with Netflix.
Yeah.
Or so it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think on certain films that's absolutely true. I actually had a lot of involvement. This was Scott Stuber, one of the first film that he had sort of acquired. And so Scott and I sort of thought I was just going to be left alone, and I'm glad I wasn't. You know, the film is a big undertaking, and I wouldn't have wanted to just been left completely out in the woods. But I would say that what they're doing, not so much just totally leaving you alone, because that's not always a good thing, but they're making the movies. You know, if you actually, I try to write original movies or make original movies that are not always a repeat of something else that's come before it. While they build off that, the actual content of it, I want to be about us today, you know, not some sort of recreation or reinterpretation, which sometimes is fine, but it can't be everything, you know. And so that's what I found to be encouraging. They said yes, you know, when everybody else was sort of saying no.
Well, I have to say that's where we have to leave it, on yes, not no. So thank you, JC, and thank you guys so much.